I am 75 years old. And honestly, I died 57 years ago. The woman you see sitting here is just a shell. A polite, smiling, agreeable shell that I built to make everyone else happy. But last month, when I finally tried to break that shell, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I waited too long. And I know this because of what I found in my husband's desk yesterday. A single letter that proved my entire life of sacrifice was a lie. To understand how I vanished, you have to understand who I was before I met Robert. I wasn't born a ghost. At 18, I was loud. I was messy. I painted with oils that stained my cuticles permanently blue and green. I argued about politics with my father at the dinner table until my face went red. I loved garlic and cheap red wine and movies that made you cry so hard your chest ached. I was a person, vibrant, inconvenient, and fully occupying my own space. But that girl, the one with the paint-stained hands and the loud laugh, she didn't survive the autumn of 1968. She died in the passenger seat of a Chevrolet Chevelle on a Tuesday night over a conversation about dinner. It was our second date. Robert was older, 23 to my 18, and he carried himself with the heavy, assured gravity of a man who had never once questioned his place in the world. He was handsome, yes, in that sharp, undeniable way that made you feel lucky just to be standing in his shadow. But more than that, he was decisive. He drove with one hand on the wheel. He spoke in statements, not questions. And I was intoxicated by it. I was a girl made of questions, and he was a man made of answers. We were driving through the city, the streetlights flickering against the rain on the windshield, when he asked me the question that would unknowingly seal my fate. "I'm starving," he said, not looking at me, just scanning the road. "Where do you want to eat?" It seems so small now, a trivial choice. But I remember the physical sensation of that moment as if it were happening right now. My heart leaped. I knew exactly where I wanted to go. There was a tiny, cramped Italian place on 4th Street called Luigi's. It smelled perpetually of burnt basil and yeast. The tables were wobbly, the lighting was too dim, and they made a pasta sauce so spicy it made your eyes water. I loved it. It was my favorite place on earth. The words were right on the tip of my tongue. "Let's go to Luigi's." But then I looked at him. I looked at the sharp line of his jaw. I looked at the expensive leather of his jacket. And a sudden cold fear washed over me. What if he hates it? What if he thinks it's cheap? What if the garlic is too strong and he doesn't want to kiss me later? What if he thinks I am too much? In that split second, I ran a calculation. I weighed my desire for pasta against my desire for his approval. "I don't know," I lied, my voice dropping an octave, becoming softer, smaller. "I'm not really picky. What do you like?" He didn't hesitate. "There's a steakhouse on Main. I've been craving a T-bone all day." I hated steak. I hated the texture of red meat, the way it sat heavy in my stomach, the smell of charred fat. But I looked at his profile, waiting for my reaction, and I made the decision that would define the next 57 years of my life. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "That sounds perfect," I said. "I'm easy. Steak sounds great." He turned to me then, and for the first time that night, he really smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a look of genuine relief and admiration. He reached over and squeezed my knee. "I love that about you, Mary," he said. "You're not high maintenance. You're not like other girls who play games or can't make up their minds. You're cool." That praise hit me like a drug. Not like other girls. Not high maintenance. Cool. I felt a rush of dopamine so potent, It drowned out the fact that I was about to eat a meal I despised. I had discovered a secret formula. If I erase my own needs, I get love. If I pretend I don't exist, I make him happy. That was the moment I signed the contract. It wasn't written in ink. It was written in the silence of things I didn't say. We went to the steakhouse. I ate the steak. I chewed every bite until my jaw ached, smiling through the nausea, nodding while he talked about his job, his car, his opinions. I didn't mention my painting. I didn't argue when he said something I disagreed with politically. I just nodded. I shrank. And every time I shrank, he stepped closer. He fell in love with the vacuum I created. He didn't fall in love with Mary. He fell in love with the space where Mary was supposed to be. That night was the beginning of the disappearing act. It didn't happen all at once. It happened one yes at a time. The next week, he made a joke about my loud friends, so I stopped inviting them over. A month later, he mentioned he didn't like women who wore too much makeup, so I threw away my red lipstick. Year by year, I sanded down my edges. I stopped listening to the folk music I loved because he called it whiny. I stopped painting because he asked when I would get a real hobby that didn't make a mess. I thought I was being a good partner. I thought this was what compromise looked like. Sacrifice. But compromise is when two people meet in the middle. This wasn't a meeting. This was a surrender. I spent the next 5 decades striving to be the easy wife, the one who never nagged, the one who never needed anything, the one who was just there. And it worked. We had a peaceful marriage. We had no fights. But looking back at that 18-year-old girl in the passenger seat, biting her tongue about the Italian food, I just want to reach through time and shake her. I want to scream at her, "Speak up, eat the pasta, be difficult, because the price of this steak is your entire soul." But I didn't speak. I smiled, and the girl with the paint-stained hands faded into the back seat, never to be seen again. The decades between 20 and 40 didn't pass in distinct years or seasons. They dissolved into a long, grey blur of domestic efficiency. If my 20s were about learning to shrink, my 30s and 40s were about perfecting the art of invisibility. I stopped being a person who made choices and started being a machine that executed functions. I became a master of anticipation, a psychic of household needs. I knew Robert was in a bad mood by the specific heaviness of his footsteps on the garage stairs, and I would have a drink poured and the television volume lowered before he even turned the doorknob. I knew my son was struggling with math before he brought the report card home, and I had the flashcards ready on the counter, smiling as if it were a fun game. I prided myself on this. I told myself that this hypersensitivity was love. I told myself that erasing my own needs to clear the path for theirs was the highest form of devotion. But looking back, I realize I wasn't being a wife or a mother. I was being a concierge. I was creating a life where no one ever had to ask for anything. And because they never had to ask, they eventually stopped realizing that the things appearing before them, the clean socks, the hot meals, the organized schedules, were being done by a human being who was tired, who was lonely, and who was slowly fading into the wallpaper. I remember the exact moment the realization shattered me. It was my 45th birthday, a milestone, or so the greeting cards say. In a normal life, perhaps the family takes the mother out to dinner. Perhaps she wears a dress she feels beautiful in. Perhaps she is toasted. But in the life I had curated, I was the low-maintenance wife, remember? I was the woman who didn't like a fuss. So, I spent my 45th birthday in the kitchen, wrestling with a 5-pound pot roast because it was Robert's favourite, and I had convinced myself that making him happy was the same thing as being happy myself. The air in the kitchen was thick with the smell of onions and searing meat, a heavy, suffocating scent that clung to my hair and clothes. My feet ached in that dull, throbbing way that becomes the background noise of motherhood. But I didn't sit down. I set the table. I folded the napkins. I lit the candles myself. When we finally sat down to eat, the scene was picture perfect. The roast was tender. The gravy was smooth. Robert was telling a funny story about his boss, and our two teenage children were laughing, their faces flushed and happy. I sat at the end of the table watching them. I wasn't eating. I was scanning. I was watching to see whose water glass was empty, whose plate needed seconds, whose napkin had fallen. I was present physically, but spiritually, I was hovering above the table, a servant in my own celebration. Then the laughter died down, and my daughter Sarah, who was 16 at the time, looked over at me. She had my eyes, but she had her father's confidence. She smiled, a genuine, sweet smile, and raised her glass of iced tea. "Mom," she said, her voice full of affection, "you really are the best. I was telling my friends today that I never have to worry about anything because you handle it all. You're just always there. You're like the foundation of this house. We'd literally collapse without you." Robert nodded in agreement, chewing a piece of carrot. "She's right, Mary. You're the rock." They meant it as a compliment. They thought they were giving me a gift. But as those words landed, foundation, rock, always there, I felt my throat close up. I felt a panic so acute I had to grip the edge of the table to keep my hands from shaking. Foundation. Think about what a foundation is. It is buried in the dirt. It holds everything up. It bears all the weight. But it is never seen. It never sees the sun. It is walked upon, built over, and ignored until it cracks. A foundation isn't a participant in the life of the house. It is a utility. I looked at my family, people I loved more than my own life, and I realized they didn't see me. They saw a function. They saw the person who made sure the world spun smoothly. They didn't know I had spent the morning crying in the shower because I felt so invisible. They didn't know I had wanted to go to a museum for my birthday, not cook a roast. They didn't know I loved poetry, or that I hated the color beige even though I had painted the entire living room that color because Robert said it was calming. I tried to search my mind for something that was just mine. A favorite song, a political opinion, a dream, and I came up empty. I had given away so many pieces of myself to keep the peace that there was nothing left. I smiled at my daughter. I said, "Thank you, sweetheart. That's so nice of you to say." I cleared the table. I washed the dishes. I dried the pots. And then I went to bed and lay next to a man who had slept beside me for 25 years, and I realized I was no different to him than the nightstand lamp. I was useful. I was reliable. I was there when he reached for me. But I had become furniture in my own life. Comfortable, silent, and completely, terrifyingly inanimate. And the worst part wasn't that they had done this to me. The worst part was that I had handed them the hammer and nails and thanked them while they built the walls around me. Robert died 4 years ago, on a Tuesday that was unremarkably grey and quiet. We had been married for 52 years. Standing by his graveside, watching the mahogany casket being lowered into the damp earth, I felt a stream of well-meaning friends and relatives touch my arm, offering the same hollow condolences. "You two were the perfect couple," they whispered, their eyes thick with pity. "You were so lucky. In 50 years we never saw you fight, not once." I nodded, accepting their praise like a currency I had no use for. They were right, of course. We never fought, but they were wrong about the reason. We didn't fight because peace is easy to maintain when only one person is living in the house. A fight requires friction. It requires two distinct, solid objects colliding. But Robert was a solid object, and I was water. I flowed around him. I took the shape of whatever container he poured me into. I didn't fight him because I wasn't there to fight. I was just an echo of his own opinions, a mirror reflecting his own desires back at him, smiling and nodding and agreeing until the very end. The weight of that deception didn't truly crush me until his final nights in the hospice wing of the hospital. The room smelled of antiseptic and wilting lilies, a cloying, artificial sweetness that I can still taste in the back of my throat. The machines hummed their rhythmic, indifferent tunes, counting down the seconds of a life I had built my entire existence around. I sat in the vinyl chair by his bedside, holding his hand. His skin was paper-thin, bruised purple from the IVs, and his breathing was a shallow rattle. I had spent the last week doing what I always did, managing. I managed the doctors. I managed the visitors. I managed the pillows to make sure he was comfortable. I was the perfect nurse, just as I had been the perfect wife. I thought I was giving him a peaceful end. I thought I was doing my job. But 2 nights before he passed, the veil lifted. It was late, past 2 in the morning. The hospital was silent, save for the distant squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Robert stirred and opened his eyes. The morphine had made him drift in and out of time, but in that moment, his gaze was startlingly clear. He turned his head on the pillow and looked at me. I expected him to say something about the pain, or maybe ask for water. I expected him to say, "I love you," the way people do in movies. Instead, he studied my face with a profound, heartbreaking confusion. He squinted, as if he were trying to read a book written in a language he didn't speak. His fingers tightened weakly around mine. "Mary," he whispered, his voice raspy and dry. I feel like I wish I had known you better." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air left my lungs. He wasn't being cruel. There was no malice in his eyes, only a deep, sad longing. He wasn't accusing me of withholding love. He was confessing a loneliness he couldn't quite name. In that terrifying moment of clarity, he realized that the woman holding his hand was a stranger. He had spent 52 years sleeping beside a woman who agreed with everything he said, who liked everything he liked, who never complained and never demanded. And because of that, he had never actually met me. He didn't know that I despised the jazz records he played every Sunday morning. He thought I loved them because I always hummed along. He didn't know that I had dreamed of learning to paint with watercolors since I was 20, but never bought a brush because he once said artists were flaky. He didn't know that I preferred silence to the constant noise of the television. He knew the character I played. He knew the easy wife. But he didn't know Mary. I wanted to scream. I wanted to weep and tell him everything right then and there. I wanted to spill 50 years of secrets onto the hospital blankets. I wanted to say, "I did this for you. I made myself small so there would be more room for you." But I couldn't. It was too late. To burden him with the truth now would be a final act of selfishness. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I swallowed the scream. I forced a smile onto my trembling lips. I smoothed the hair back from his forehead and lied to him one last time. "You know me, Robert," I soothed, my voice shaking. "You know me better than anyone." He closed his eyes, but the furrow in his brow didn't smooth out. He died 48 hours later, taking his confusion with him, and I was left alone in the silence I had spent a lifetime curating. The perfect marriage was a fraud. I hadn't given him a partner. I had given him a mannequin that cooked and cleaned and smiled, but had no soul, no friction, no truth. I realized that by trying to be everything he wanted, I had denied him the one thing he actually needed, the chance to love a real, flawed, complicated human being. I had robbed him of his wife, and I had robbed myself of my life, all in the name of being good. And now, the stranger in the mirror is the only company I have left. I am telling you this story not because I want your pity, but because I want to save you. I sit here in coffee shops or on park benches, and I watch you. I see the young women of today, and while you look different than I did in 1968, you wear different clothes, you have careers, you have phones glued to your hands. I see the same terrified look in your eyes that I saw in my own reflection for 50 years. I see you swallowing your words like they are shards of glass. I see you apologizing for taking up space on the subway. I see you laughing at jokes that you don't find funny, just to keep the mood light. I see you trying so desperately to be the chill girl, the low-maintenance girlfriend, the perfect wife who never nags and never complains. And I want to grab you by the shoulders and shake you until you hear me. Please, for the love of God, stop. You think you are buying love with your silence, but you are only buying time. And the interest rate on that loan is higher than you can possibly imagine. Being easy is the most expensive thing you will ever be. It does not cost you money, it costs you your soul. It costs you the jagged, beautiful, messy edges of your identity. When you spend your life sanding yourself down to be smooth and palatable for everyone else, you eventually sand yourself down to nothing. You become a smooth stone that anyone can pick up and skip across the water, and then you sink. I look at my life now, and I see the transaction clearly. I traded my voice for safety. I traded my passions for peace. And what did I get in return? I got a beautiful house that feels like a museum. I got a marriage that was peaceful only because it was hollow. I got a family who loves the idea of me, but who would be strangers to the woman I actually am inside. I sit in this living room, surrounded by photos of smiling faces, and I feel a loneliness so profound it makes my bones ache. It is a specific kind of loneliness, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who love a mask you are too afraid to take off. I hear you justify it. I hear you say, "I just don't want to fight," or "It's not a big deal," or "I love him, so I'll compromise." But there is a difference between compromise and erasure. Compromise is when you meet in the middle. Erasure is when you disappear so the other person has more room. You are terrified that if you are difficult, if you have needs, if you have boundaries, if you scream when you are angry, that they will leave. And I am here to tell you, let them leave. If someone leaves you because you expressed a need, they were never in love with you. They were in love with your silence. They were in love with your compliance. They were in love with the convenience of you. Let them go. Because the alternative is staying, and staying means slowly suffocating in a room full of air. Be difficult, be complicated, be inconvenient, have opinions that are sharp and uncomfortable. Take up space, demand that the restaurant food be sent back if it's cold. Say no without following it up with an apology. Being real is messy, yes. It causes friction, it causes fights. But friction is proof of life. Friction creates heat, and heat creates warmth. A relationship without friction is just two people freezing to death in the same room, politely ignoring the cold. I am 75 years old, and last week I bought a set of watercolor paints. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the blank white paper, and I cried. I cried because I didn't know what to paint. I cried because I didn't know what colors I liked. I am finally trying to figure out who I am, trying to introduce myself to myself 3 decades too late. But I am tired. My hands shake. My eyes are dim. I am trying to build a self from the rubble of a lifetime of self-betrayal, and it is exhausting work. Don't wait until you are tired. Don't wait until the person you are trying to please is in the ground. Don't wait until you are sitting in a quiet house with nothing but regrets to keep you company. Scream your truth while you still have the voice to do it. Break the china. Ruin the dinner. Be the difficult woman. Because the difficult woman is the one who actually lives.